Yeah, I'm the average American right here at this table because you guys are talking and I don't really understand what it is that you guys are saying.
What do you think? Should you blame this on DEI, laziness, or just lack of education? I mean, this does make a very strong case and argument for Linda McMahon and President Trump's nomination for her to head up the Department of Education and basically abolish the government tax-funded Board of Education that has obviously led to sinking test scores, dumber people, and some really, really, really rich career politicians by way of some very successful NGOs that if we really drilled down on and sunk our teeth into, we would discover they don't really do anything. They don't really do much of anything at all, really. Or better yet, would you just call this another distraction? Leave it to CNN to bring on the slow, dumb, dim-witted, can't read good black man to sit on a panel surrounded by rich, wealthy whites as he complains or confesses he doesn't even know what they're talking about. Maybe it's because he's not even plugged in. I mean, you do see his earpiece dangling off of his ear, right?
Like, seriously, I don't get it. The only thing that a lot of people who have families, who carpool, who go to and from the work, who live in the suburbs, who live in the cities, they're just wondering when things are going to get bad. That's what they're wondering. And all of the macroeconomic talk is going over their head. And honestly, I feel for them. I feel for them because it doesn't seem like anyone is talking directly to them. They're talking to the markets, they're talking to each other, they're talking to the financial system, but no one's telling somebody, hey, at the end of this summer, when you need to buy school supplies for your kids to go back to school when it's backpack time, like that money will be there and those prices will be stable. No one is talking to them. And I think that's the biggest tragedy in all of this.
The truth to be told to them, most people don't want to say. Because we had it today from Jerome Powell, chair of the Fed.
I'm not joking.
You can't handle the truth.
What?
I'm working on my Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth.
Well, it's not that no one told you or nobody is telling you the truth. The real problem is all these people aren't listening.
I bet you there are a lot of people that voted for Trump that wish that Kamala Harris was in the White House. Didn't vote.
Tell us and remind us why you were so supportive of Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party, considering how chaotic things looked, and we ultimately learned that side of the aisle was.
Because she wasn't Donald Trump.
Simple as plain? Just that simple? If it were anybody else other than Donald Trump, let's say, for example, it was...
But Donald Trump has been out there saying, you know, this was Biden's economy, this was so bad, like the eggs are so expensive because I haven't had a chance yet. And voters are willing to give new presidents the benefit of the doubt in those circumstances. Do you really not see yesterday as a line in the sand? Before he could argue it was Biden's, and now he has to, whatever happens, good or bad, own that?
Well, I remember that, and I will say this, in the Biden administration, when it took a downturn one day, and you all just called it a correction, and there was never really much any mention of it. So it's really a double standard. Yeah, and everybody knew it was going to take a hit, but economists will tell you you can stack up a group that'll say no, and the other ones will say yes. That the market is not really a good indicator. I noticed we haven't mentioned the job growth that's happened, the so-called surprising new numbers, and I'm sure that people will say that's just Joe Biden's economy that Trump has inherited. But in fact, that is an indicator of where things are headed, and I think things are headed to more manufacturing in this country. You've seen major car manufacturers announce billion-dollar investments in this country. You've seen that across the board. In Tennessee, for instance, we're booming, and we're the number one depository of U-Haul trucks and trailers. And they're all leaving California and all the other border states to come here. So,
all right,
I think that's a good indicator.
This now shut down apartment complex
was one of the most dangerous areas in Aurora, Colorado. Dozens of people have been arrested and deemed or labeled as members of Tren de Aragua, an international criminal organization, a dangerous gang that was formed in Venezuela and has had criminal activities in countries throughout the region and here in the U.S. The crackdown that happened here seems to have significantly reduced crime in the area. That doesn't mean that every gang member was taken in. That doesn't mean that TDA is not active here or elsewhere. They're still working on that. But they've been adamant about saying, look, the city is not out of control. But yes, the city has been impacted by this image of a crime-infested town. President Trump called Aurora, Colorado, where we are, a war zone of TDA activity. The DEA leadership has called this place ground zero for some of the most violent criminals in the United States. We are here to get a reality check from the ground of who this gang was threatening and how far did their crimes reach. Some of what we've heard today while riding along with law enforcement was that the primary victims were also immigrants, were people who were vulnerable, who were afraid to call the police, and that although they were committing, the Tren de Aragua members, very serious, very dangerous, violent crimes, the way that their activity was depicted or has been shown in media reports and in messaging from the administration as something that took over the entire city of Aurora or Denver or even the state of Colorado is an unfair description.
The White House press secretary has called one of these deportation mistakes a quote-unquote clerical error. Well, if it's a clerical error, then bring them back.
Right.
Is this the immigration policy people thought they were voting for?
First of all, the error that you are referring to was a clerical error. It was an administrative error. The administration maintains the position that this individual who was deported to El Salvador and will not be returning to our country was a member of the brutal and vicious MS-13 gang. That is fact number one. Fact number two, we also have credible intelligence proving that this individual was involved in human trafficking. And fact number three, this individual was a member, actually a leader of the brutal MS-13 gang, which this president has designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Fact number four is that foreign terrorists do not have legal protections in the United States of America anymore.
But a judge ordered that he should remain in this country. So are you saying that it is okay to ignore a judge's ruling if you don't like it?
Who does that judge work for?
He's an immigration
It was an
judge.
immigration judge who works for the Department of Justice at the direction of the Attorney General of the United States, whose name is Pam Bondi, who has committed to eradicating MS-13 from our nation's interior. And let me tell you why we've made this commitment. MS-13, may I remind each and every one of you, is a brutal and vicious gang. They raped and strangled a 20-year-old autistic woman to death in Maryland. They hacked 4 people to death with machetes in a park on Long Island. They have kidnapped, sexually tortured, and shot a teenage girl in Texas after she insulted them, allegedly. Killed and mutilated a 17-year-old girl in Virginia, stabbing him 16 times and cutting off his hands. They beheaded and cut out the heart of a man in Washington, D.C., They raped and murdered a 13-year-old girl in California. They sex trafficked a slew of young girls, including one who was just 12 years old. Raped an 11-year-old girl in Brooklyn while her brother was in the room. Sex trafficked a 13-year-old in Maryland and Virginia, miles away from this White House, even beating her 26 times on her backside with a baseball bat. Pressured homeless New Yorkers to undergo unnecessary surgeries such as spinal fusion in order to bolster their fraudulent lawsuits. These are vicious criminals.
I'm not joking. You can't handle the truth. What? I'm working on my Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth.
The Democrats are more passionate about an MS-13 gang member than they were about any of the Americans who've been killed or raped by illegal immigrants.
Thank you to everyone that has helped us, that has supported us in fighting this, and we will continue fighting for Kilmar, for my husband.
Law,
I put you in a
when it
different
comes
category.
to the law and due process, That is not a distinction.
Well,
when
if you'd like to argue that Trinidad should have the same rights and that you get as an American citizen, go ahead.
Here's the argument. Change the Constitution.
Hold on a second.
The argument is
you're saying that a terrorist can walk across the border and become effectively a U.S. citizen?
That's not what I'm saying.
Hold on. Scott, look at me. Okay.
Yeah, let's give the host
you and I are talking. You and I are talking.
Respect.
Okay.
What
I'm saying to you is that the law does not make a distinction between U.S. citizens and everybody else when it comes to being accused of crimes. Are you saying that that should not be in place? That if you happen to not be a citizen, you get to be thrown into a jail with no process at all?
I'm saying that these people are effectively terrorists. They walked across our borders illegally.
Okay.
They are violent. And I don't really want them here.
Yes. Julio Rosas, Blaze Media.
Oh, pleasure.
How you doing?
Very fine. How are you?
I just wanted to ask you how it feels to see that the United States has a secure border now that President Trump is in office, as opposed to when you were Secretary of Homeland Security. Do you have any regret facilitating an open border, sir? Border crossings are down 95%.
Security announcement. Please maintain.
Do you regret allowing Tren de Aragua to gain a foothold in the United States, sir?
Unattended baggage is subject to search, inspection, damage, and removal.
You don't have anything to say, sir, about your time as Homeland Security Secretary? Facilitating an open border? I mean, it was a big issue, sir. It's one of the reasons why President Trump won re-election. You don't have anything to say about it? Do you have regret about losing track, of facilitating the losing track of all those thousands of migrant children that are handed over to HHS?
Please move forward to next door. Please do not enter the corridor. Doors are closing. Please clear the door.
How does it feel that because of the Biden and Harris administration's policies, mass deportations actually gained the majority support? I mean, sir, Tren de Aragua didn't have a foothold in the United States before you guys came into office. It's a pretty big issue, right? So you're fine with how you guys handled the border?
Well, I went shopping in Aurora yesterday. What a lot of Americans need to know is Aurora is over 400,000 people. It's Colorado's third largest city. Violent crime is down 2 years in a row. Car thefts are down 2 years in a row. It's a wonderful city. I'm there all the time. It's really a great, diverse city, and it's growing fast. It'll probably be the number 1 or number 2 city in Colorado over the next decade or two. So it's a great city. It's safer than it's been.
So you guys keeping up with what's going on in Denver? Aurora, Colorado? I have friends there, actually, that are leaving. They hightailed it out of there. They're not taking the chance to see if it gets better. It only took 2 apartment complexes and 3 gun stores getting robbed and jewelry stores by these Venezuelan gangs who have now paired up with MS-13. And they're gone. They're not waiting around. The cops couldn't do anything. The FBI couldn't do anything. Homeland Security didn't do anything. One of the complexes was taken back and condemned because it's inhabitable. And the people, the Venezuelan gang, was collecting money, the rent money, for the landlord, but not giving it to him. And there was nothing he could do about it. They just took over. Those are your sanctuary cities that you love so much. And you're mad at us, patriots, who are like, close the damn border. They did rob 3 gun stores. And a couple jewelry stores. And now the new thing is they're dressed up like Amazon workers and they're doing home invasions. So guys, be very careful, because the closer we get to this election, if you're expecting an Amazon delivery, just leave it outside for a little bit. And if you have to open the door, really check your surroundings, because they're bum rushing the doors. Just be very, 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 very careful. Dangerous times, guys. It's bad.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns.
And we're standing out here, and I can tell you that gang members have not taken over this apartment complex. In contacts with our residents, reassuring them about the criminal activity that's happening here and how we're going to address it. We're out here, we want to reassure the people that live in this community that we are actively investigating criminal activity that's happening and listening to them to so that we can learn anything that we're missing. You know, what are we missing, and actually find out what exactly is going on. We're out here because we care. I mean, nobody should be wearing this uniform if they don't care. And we want the residents and the people that live here to know that we care. We've been talking to the residents here and learning from them to find out what exactly is going on. And there's definitely a different picture. I'm not saying that there's not gang members that don't live in this community. But what we're learning out here is that gang members have not taken over this complex. We've really made an effort to the last few days to just really ask the specific questions and the direct questions in terms of the gang activity and who's actually making sure that people aren't paying rent to gang leaders or gang members, that's not happening. And we've discovered here today and yesterday talking to so many residents that that's not the case. We've been talking about, and they've been sincere with us. We really believe that they are sincere with us. And we're standing out here, and I can tell you that gang members have not taken over this apartment complex.
Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad. Prospero año y felicidad.
Nikki Haley. Let's say, for example, it was Ron DeSantis or Chris Christie, even of Vivek Ramaswamy or somebody. Are you saying that you may have thought differently?
I voted for Nikki Haley in the Texas primary.
I got you. So you would have voted for her for presidency if she had won the Republican nomination?
There was a lot more to learn, right? You can't just, jump based off what was happening to the point of the primaries. I didn't agree with everything she said, but I certainly would have considered it. And look, I like Kamala. I don't want to throw her under the bus.
Sure.
I think she's smarter than people give her credit for, but I think she was really held back by her team. They would not let her do just basic things that would have made a lot of difference.
This is a big March jobs report. Non-farm payrolls beats estimates. 228,000 jobs. That would be the strongest this year, and it would comp to 323,000 in D's of last year.
I really like Biden. But I did look at him and I think maybe you do need to step aside. And now the rumors that we're hearing starting to make sense. And what happened is everyone said, you're disloyal if you say that. Shut up and fall in line. And that's why people want to be independents these days. Because partisan politics, they lie. It was the Democratic Party that made that choice that said, you're betraying him if you call it like you see it. And the point here is he wasn't necessarily fit to run for another 4 years.
Okay. I do find it interesting in this conversation, though, about Democrats finding their, free market bona fides all of a sudden. I mean, these are the same party that's been arguing that corporations need to pay higher taxes. I mean, effectively, a tariff is just a tax on corporate activity. That's what it is. And Democrats for years have argued for higher corporate tax rates, and now they're arguing against effectively a tax on corporate activity. I think if I were Donald Trump, I might next week say, you know what? I'll meet you on this. Let's slash the corporate tax rate in half, and it'll mitigate your concerns about the tariffs. I bet you wouldn't find one Democrat who would agree to it, even though it would be an amazing idea.
China has prohibitive tariffs. So does Vietnam. So does Mexico. So does Europe. So do a lot of countries. So does India. But if tariffs are so destructive of their economies, why is China booming? How did India become an economic powerhouse when it has these exorbitant tariffs on American imports? How did Vietnam, of all places, become such a different country, even though it has these prohibitive tariffs? Why isn't Germany, before its energy problems, why wasn't it a wreck? It's got tariffs on almost everything that we send them. How is the EU even functioning with these tariffs? I thought tariffs destroyed an economy, but they seem to like them. And they're angry that they're no longer asymmetrical. Apparently, our people who are tariffing us think tariffs improve their economy. Maybe they're right. I don't know. The second thing is, why would you get angry at the person who is reacting to the asymmetrical tariff and not the people who inaugurated the tariff? Why is Canada mad at us when it's running a $63 billion surplus and it has tariffs on some American products at 250%? Doesn't it seem like the people who started this asymmetrical, if I could use the word trade war, should be the culpable people, not the people who are reluctantly reacting to it?
Markets are crashing around the world for the second day in a row. The consensus is that the president's tariffs were much higher than expected and based on economic formulas that people do not understand. What is your reaction and what is the impact on Europeans? You want them to spend more on defense,
yes,
which they're agreeing to finally. But how can they do that when their economies are crashing and they are now
No, their economies are not crashing. The markets are reacting. No, their economies are not crashing. Their markets are reacting to a dramatic change in the global order in terms of trade. And so what happens is pretty straightforward. If you're a company and you make a bunch of your products in China, and all of a sudden shareholders or people that play the stock market realize that it's going to cost a lot more to produce in China, your stock is going to go down. But ultimately, the markets, as long as they know what the rules are going to be moving forward, and as long as that's set and you can sustain where you're going to be, the markets will adjust. Businesses around the world, including in trade and global trade, they just need to know what the rules are. Once they know what the rules are, they will adjust to those rules.
Donald Trump's tariffs do not represent all Americans.
We'll come back to dipshit Gavin Newsom in just a second. I wanted to chime in here and add that Marco Rubio's response seems to draw a distinction between an economy crashing and markets reacting, which reflects different economic phenomena. An economy crashing typically implies a broad, severe collapse. Think widespread unemployment, plummeting GDP, business failures, and systemic financial distress, like during the 2008 financial crisis or the Great Depression. It's a dramatic term that suggests deep structural failure across multiple sectors. When Rubio says European markets are reacting, he's likely pointing to something narrower. Fluctuations in financial markets, such as stock indices, bond yields, or currency values. Markets react constantly to news, policy changes, geopolitical events, or shifts in investor sentiment. For example, if European stock markets like the FTSE 100 or the DAX drop due to uncertainty, say over energy prices, ECB interest rates hike, or political instability, it's a reaction, not necessarily a sign of an entire economy imploding. Data from early this year, 2025, might show volatility in European markets. For example, a 5 to 10% dip in key indices, but GDP growth, while possibly sluggish, say 0.5% to 1% annually in the Eurozone, isn't likely in free fall. Rubio's counter could be a way to push back against exaggerated framing, and he suggests or is suggesting the reporter's claim overstates the situation. Europe might be facing turbulence, not a full-on crash, and without specific data from April of 2025, it's hard to pinpoint the exact events, but this kind of distinction often hinges on measurable indicators. Market reactions are short-term and sentiment-driven, while an economic crash is a sustained, real economy breakdown. And he's likely implying the former is happening, not the latter. But more importantly, let's talk about the actual destruction of an economy. And that is coming from the media. That is coming from the left. That is coming from the likes of Mark Cuban, and soon you'll see here Gavin Newsom of, we just don't like President Trump. We don't like Trump. So we'll literally do anything against President Trump. We'll literally do anything the opposite of Trump. We don't care about the country. We don't care about you. We don't care about me. We don't care about our families. We don't care about our neighbors. We don't care about the state. We don't care about anything. We don't care about economies, markets crashing, nothing. The only thing they care about is how can we oppose Donald Trump? How can we push back against President Trump? How can we undermine the Trump administration? That's it. It's not hard to understand. You see what I'm saying?
And on behalf of 40 million Americans that live in the great state of California, the tentpole of the U.S. economy, 14% of the U.S. GDP, the fifth largest economy in the world, the dominant manufacturing state in America. Our state of mind is around supporting stable trading relationships around the globe. And that's why today I've directed my administration to look at new opportunities to expand trade and to remind our trading partners around the globe that California remains a stable partner.
Oh, bravo, Gavin Newsom. And I got to respond to this, to Gavin Newsom's response, or Newscum. Truly a visionary move. Why bother sticking with the pesky United States when you can just cozy up to the rest of the world and undermine those big bad tariffs, right? The governor of California here saying he wants to work with other countries to help undermine Trump tariffs, instructing nations around the world that California wants to remain a very stable trade partner. Now, this insinuates California will operate differently and independently from the rest of the U.S. California, as a rogue trade ninja on its own, operating in the shadows, slinking around in this ominous message of shadow entities and shadow government global commerce. What a genius stroke. Perhaps maybe his running mate in the future will be Tim Walz. And obviously, Gavin Newsom has strong ties to China and the CCP. I'm sure Gavin Newsom's pals in Beijing are just thrilled to have their favorite governor ready to roll out the red carpet, and maybe a little bit more, if you know what I mean, whenever they swing by. San Francisco's streets have never looked so sparkling clean, well, at least for that 1 week that Z popped in for a visit. Priorities, right? Hell, he bent over backwards welcoming them and cleaning up San Francisco streets for their visit, and even sucked off Z in the back of his BYD. Thankfully, it had hands-free driving capability and technology for self-driving, making Roadhead a much safer and possibly more enjoyable nut for the president to bust down the back of Gavin's throat, or the governor's throat, figuratively, not literally, folks. And let's not gloss over the financial wizardry of losing billions of dollars like it's monopoly money while wildfires turn your state into a frickin' barbecue pit. And I would like to also point out how Gavin Newsom is also responsible for the highest levels of financial irresponsibility after losing billions of dollars from state taxpayers and federal funding from his old buddy Joe. Newsom also let his cities burn in wildfires with zero remorse and even less accountability or action taken since to make sure something like that tragedy never happens again. Accountability? Yeah, what is that? Who needs it when you've got charm and TikTok reels to passively aggressively flirt with the world leaders or your new podcast, which I don't think anybody's watching. Oh, and this is likely his beginning push for a presidential election run as he speaks passively aggressively, tongue-in-cheek on this TikTok reel and podcast to foreign world leaders in some hopes of buying an election. I mean, it worked for Wisconsin, right? Got to lay the groundwork for the White House run, Gavin, because nothing screams presidential material like torching your budget, your cities, and your biggest taxpayer all at once. But better yet, maybe the best part about it all is how Gavin Newsom did such a phenomenal job of not only running his top grossing taxpaying source out of the state, and that being not just Elon Musk, but Tesla too. Elon Musk and Tesla piecing out, leaving California in the rear view, and just the cherry on top of Newsom's sundae. So here's to you, Gavin Newsom, master of trade rebellion, fiscal faceplants, and sucking up and sucking off, figuratively, of course, to anyone who'll listen. I can't wait to see how you spin this one into a campaign slogan. California will trade with anyone but our own country. Nailed it. Yeah. Way to go, Newsom.
We've only got a few seconds left, but people are throwing around the R word, and they see the Dow down 2,100 points, and people are worried about a recession. They're worried that we can't do this without sending this economy into such a deep dive that we can't come back from it. And I know you guys are all about growth. I know you're about lowering taxes, rolling back regulations, and seeing that growth. Are you concerned that this is going to put us into a recession?
The exact opposite. We inherited from Joe Biden an economy in total free fall.
So I don't think it's fair to say economies are crashing. Markets are crashing because markets are based on the stock value of companies who today are embedded in modes of production that are bad for the United States. We have to be a country that thinks we're the largest consumer market in the world, and yet the only thing we export is services. And we need to stop that. We need to get back to a time where we're a country that can make things, and to do that we have to reset the global order of trade.
And the other part of my question.
Well, the worst thing is to leave it the way it is forever. I mean, this just can't continue. We can't continue to be a country that doesn't make things.
Yesterday, President Trump declared that it was, in fact, Liberation Day. His giant tariff policy that he just dropped on the market unilaterally, probably unconstitutionally. Trump's reciprocal tariffs impose hundreds of billions of dollars in new taxes on Americans, be the largest tax increase since the Revenue Act of 1968. One of the biggest tax increases on American consumers in the history of America. And it's going to cost American consumers. It will cost American producers who use inputs from other countries. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted immediately more than 1,000 points. The S&P 500 plummeted more than 3%. The NASDAQ plummeted almost 4.5%. There are real-world implications for this sort of stuff. Trade wars are, in fact, not good and not easy to win, particularly if you don't actually have a plan. It is predicated on a bad idea of how international trade works. A fundamental misunderstanding of trade deficits. Trade deficits they're an accounting procedure. Trade deficits have pretty much nothing to do with the health of an economy. I can name you a period in American history where there was a fairly large surplus in America's balance of trade. The entire Great Depression.
It says the guy in the middle of a huge Daily Wire bankruptcy claim. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Ben.
We have to be able to make things to provide jobs for Americans. That's it. It's that simple. China, as an example, I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, they don't consume anything. All they do is export and flood and distort markets, in addition to all the tariffs and barriers they put in place. So the president rightly has concluded that the current status of global trade is bad for America and good for a bunch of other people, and he's going to reset it, and he's absolutely right to do it.
Let me ask you about also the predictability of relationships with allies. The Prime Minister of Greenland, the Prime Minister of Denmark, which at this point owns Greenland, so Denmark, a NATO ally, is saying that it's unacceptable that one country cannot annex another country.
Well, no one's annexed anything. It's going to be up to Greenlanders. The vice president made that clear. He's going to respect the self-determination of Greenlanders. So at some point, the Greenlanders have made clear that they want to be independent of Denmark. So that's Denmark should focus on the fact that the Greenlanders don't want to be a part of Denmark. That's what they should focus on. We didn't give them that idea. They've been talking about that for a long time. Whenever they make that decision, they'll make that decision. And then what we're not going to do is let China come in now and say, offer them a bunch of money and become, dependent on China.
The president said he would not rule out using military force against Denmark, a NATO ally.
No, he said he would not rule out. No. He said he would not rule out. He said, I'm not going to rule out anything if Greenland is encroached upon by a foreign power like a China or Russia or anybody else. But it doesn't matter because Greenlanders are going to make a decision. They're the ones that want to get away from Denmark. They're the ones that want to be independent. And not us. We didn't come up with that idea. They did. And if they make that decision, then the United States would stand ready, potentially, to step in and say, okay, we can create a partnership with you. We're not at that stage. But that's what the vice president made clear last week in his visit there. His statement was very abundantly clear, that we will respect the self-determination of the people of Greenland. People of Greenland, and they're the ones that want to leave Denmark. That wasn't our idea.
All right, well, second question here. Missy from Washington Post.
Elon, how are you? I'm Jesse Waters. Good to see you. I'm not going to beg for you to come on my show. I know it'll happen eventually. You said the other day you uncovered some evidence that there was massive Social Security fraud and that arrests were imminent. Yes. What can you tell us about that? And what can you tell us about what you've seen politicians do to make massive amounts of money off of the federal government, like Nancy Pelosi? Please.
Yes. So we've encountered, there's really so much for it. It's deciding what should be prosecuted first, because it's such a long list. You have to actually prioritize the list. We convey the list to the Department of Justice. The DOJ has a process that they go through to review and think about it. The wheels of justice turn slowly. In fact, obviously, I have a maniacal sense of urgency. So to me, when I see that terrible fraud has happened, I'm like, why haven't we arrested someone already? But as the saying goes, the wheels of justice turn slowly but surely. And I think probably the person that stole 400,000 Social Security numbers, at least, maybe more, will be arrested hopefully this week. With respect to the non-governmental organizations, these sort of fake NGOs, I think there needs to be a number of arrests in that regard as well, because these are fake charities where mostly Democrats. I don't want to be clear. There's sometimes a little bit of Republican in there because they sometimes throw the Republicans a bone to say, "Hey, be quiet about this." So that's where you start getting the uniparty thing going on. But it is overwhelmingly to Democrats, and they give give billions of dollars to NGOs run by Democrats that then go through a whole network of additional NGOs. It's a giant money laundering scheme. Really, at this point, I think the word NGO and money laundering are almost synonymous.
So the arrests will be made. They're coming. 400,000 Social Security numbers stolen. That's wild. That's crazy. Almost as wild and as crazy as this post that I saw earlier today that said, Jasmine Crockett says she simply forgot to inform Social Security that her grandmother died in 2012. DK says, sure she did. And she's been collecting $2,600 a month for 13 years. Now, more to that story behind the scenes. And, just a quick, hey, this sounds too good to be true, but just kind of wondering, is it true that Jasmine Crockett has been collecting her dead grandmother's Social Security? Short answer, no. But I got a video coming up on that. I'll share it with you guys later. But more importantly, Elon Musk, obviously the left, the Dems, they're trying to throw a stick in his bicycle wheel spokes, a wrench in this entire plan, to get the gears off track, skip a tooth. But it's because they know that President Trump and Elon and we are all working to put an end to the waste, fraud, and abuse that's been going on for so long. And so the media paints this picture and presents this idea that Elon has no proof. So it's to create drive a wedge, divide us all from what's actually happening, and assume that everything is just hearsay, just talk, Not true, I don't think. I don't know for a fact. I'm not there. However, I feel like Elon is very smart. Obviously, he's proven that. And time again. But regardless, there is a process. And they're not going to give away their next move, okay? This isn't some signal text about bombing Houthis. Yeah, pun intended. It's a joke, guys. If you think I'm drinking the woke juice and you're going to unsubscribe because of it, just go ahead and fucking do it. I don't give a shit. I don't care. However, I'm going to tell you guys the truth. And the truth is that Elon, Pam Bondi, President Trump, they know what the hell's going on. They know what they're doing. And there's no freaking way they're going to tip off the left, the Democrats, those who are possibly going to soon get a knock on the door, find themselves in handcuffs, arrested, deposed, prosecuted, and then criminally charged and thrown in jail, becoming convicted felons for the crimes that they have been committing for so long. They're not going to do that. This is going to play out, folks. Be patient. You're going to have to be even more patient than Elon Musk, who's on a definitive timeline here before he has to, head out as an SGE. But his departure has nothing to do with his lack of effectiveness or not doing his job. He's not a DEI hire. He's not a box checker. And there's more to this, folks. We are only a few weeks into this. This is just getting started. Stick with me. We're going places.
Mr. Secretary, I'd like to ask you about the Russia-Ukraine negotiations. Can you give us tell us about the American assessment of the conditions that Russia put forward regarding the Black Sea ceasefire talks, and also the British and French foreign ministers said this morning that Putin was dragging his feet. Do you agree with that?
Maybe. He might be. We don't know yet. We're going to find out fairly soon. Look, here's what the president wanted to do. He wants to end this war, and he wanted to test it very early in his administration. Is it possible to end this war on terms that are acceptable, obviously, to both sides? Because you can't end a war unless both sides agree. And that's what we're in the process of finding out. We will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not. I hope they are. It would be good for the world if that war ended. But obviously we have to test that proposition. So we're working through that process. We had a visitor, that Mr. Kirill was here this week, had a chance to sit down with him. He met with others. He'll take some messages back, and the message is the United States needs to know whether you're serious or not about peace. Ultimately, Putin will have to make that decision. The Russian Federation will have to make that decision. I think the Ukrainians have shown a willingness to enter, for example, into a complete ceasefire to create space for negotiation. At some point here, fairly soon, not 6 months from now, you know, the Russians and Putin will have to make a decision about whether they're serious for peace or not, and I hope they are serious. It would be good for the world if that war ended.
What is your assessment of the Russian conditions that were put forward? And also, Dmitriev said, following his talks with Mr. Witkoff yesterday, that the U.S. and Russia might resume direct flights as maybe a confidence-building measure. Do you support that? So that
I haven't heard anything about direct flights. I can tell you, but I don't know who's going to fly on it because all these people are sanctioned. But I would just tell you that the thing I would point to you is this. We're going to wait and see. The Russians know our position in terms of wanting to end the war, and we will know from their answers very soon whether they are serious about proceeding with real peace or whether this is a delay tactic. It's a delay tactic. The president's not interested in that. If this is dragging things out, President Trump's not going to fall into the trap of endless negotiations about negotiations. We will know soon enough whether or not Russia's serious about peace. If they are, that'll be great. Then we can move towards peace. If they're not, then we'll have to reevaluate where we stand and what we do moving forward about it. But we'll be in no different a position than we are today, or we were when he took office. He wanted to know early in his administration, is peace possible? We're testing to see if the Russians are interested in peace. Their actions, not their words, their actions will determine whether they're serious or not. And we intend to find that out sooner rather than later.
And what about their conditions?
Which conditions?
They put forward additional conditions after you guys had the Black Sea ceasefire.
Yeah, so again, I mean, this is part of the back and forth of these sorts of things. I've had phone calls with foreign leaders, and then I read the readout, and it's like, oh, we said, no, you never, they came, they said something to me they never said. I guess that's part of the game in this place or whatever. But look, bottom line is, to me, at the end of the day, what's going to matter here is whether we're going to move towards peace or not.
Mr. President, very soon the Senate's going to be voting on a budget resolution that essentially accomplishes 5 objectives, but at least 4. And one is to prevent a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people at the end of the year, number 1. Number 2, it rebuilds our military by investing in our military readiness in a way that will enable us to deal with and deter the threats that America deals with in a very dangerous world. It will restore energy dominance for our country, making energy more affordable to the American people, something that we saw a huge run-up during the Biden inflation days. Part of that, in a big way, was the cost of energy. Obviously, securing the border. And there are resources in there to make sure that over the course of the next 4 years of this administration that they have what they need to ensure that our border is secure and that the American people are safe. And finally, Mr. President, reducing spending. Now, I know that's a sort of a novel concept around here. We've heard a lot about massive tax cuts for billionaires. That's been a recurring theme that we've heard from the Democrats. But the one thing you don't hear a lot about is the run-up in federal spending. So tax revenues, as a general rule, have stayed very static as a percentage of our entire economy, around 17.1% thereabouts. Government spending as a percentage of our economy, on the other hand, has gone up, and gone up dramatically. So just take a look at this chart. Basically, in the last 5 years, the run-up that we've seen in spending has been about 56% from 2019 to 2024. 56% increase in spending. Now, what's ironic about that, Mr. President, is government revenue has also been going up, right? Everybody said, well, you're going to cut taxes, we're going to run these big deficits. Well, what happened? In 2017, we cut taxes on the American people, we unleashed the American economy, we reduced rates, accelerated cost recovery, so people could recover their capital investments more quickly. What did they do? They invested. And it created more, not less revenue. $1.5 trillion more than was projected at the time by the Joint Committee on Taxation and the CBO. $1.5 trillion more revenue than what was projected. I think you can say they missed it by a long shot. Well, this time around, we've seen estimates, and Senator Graham, Senator Crapo were down here earlier today, suggesting that the The Council of Economic Advisors' prediction is that you will see revenue increase by about $4 trillion by making the 2017 tax law permanent. So what we have, Mr. President, the reason we're running these big deficits isn't because we tax too little, it's because we spend too much. That's the delta. Tax revenues have gone up, and gone up consistently over time, particularly since 2017. What's gone up a lot faster, as I said, is government spending.
I hope you guys are paying attention. I got this notebook here, and I bought this a few months ago at, I think it was Barnes & Noble, or no, maybe it was Barnes & Noble. And either way, I take these notes, and I write these notes down because there's something about writing that triggers more of a memory, at least in my brain, than just saying it or even typing it. So I write these down and I read these notes often, or at least I should probably read them even more often than I have, just to stay focused and stay on track here. This stemming from where we started with this video, where somebody felt as though they didn't understand what was going on or what was being said, the conversations that were being had around them. And I'm not quite sure you can make it any simpler or easier to understand than how John Thune just put it, that the problem is spending, okay? That is a huge problem. And so what I ended up writing down here is, I just titled this one. I put the date and I just put some random titles, so I'll try to like remember what my mind was at the time. But I said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And these are three subjects, three talking points, three truths that I'll probably be bringing to you guys more frequently. Repetition will build that muscle memory. The first being the 5 steps of building wealth, which we've talked about here a lot recently. But the first is to earn more. The second is to spend less. And literally that is the embodying of what John Thune just talked about, but more importantly, what President Trump, Elon, Doge, we're all trying to do here. But the 5 steps are earn more income, earn more revenue, spend less than you make, budget, $0 budget, eliminate waste, debt, high interest credit cards, and save and invest. The next bullet point we have here is diversity, security, and cash flow. And now is going to be probably one of the most important times to have that at the forefront of your mind, because the changes that are happening with tariffs and, business in general and the economy and market shifts, reactions, you're going to need diversity, you're going to need security, and you're definitely going to need cash flow. So that's huge. Lastly, the third bullet point here of my we hold these truths to be self-evident there are 2 types of people. If you saw my video the other day, you already know what I'm going to say here, but I'll remind you if you forgot, or if this is your first time. There's 2 types of people. There's a type of people that don't like being lied to, and then there's a type of people who don't like being told the truth. I don't think John Thune was telling a lie. I think he was telling the truth. But not everybody's willing to accept that. Not everybody's going to be happy about that. And that's where we get the pushback. That's where we get the fight from the left and the Democrats and the media and the Mark Cubans of the world. They don't like being told the truth.
Hey, I'm James O'Keefe. You work with the NIH. This is you on camera. I heard you had a really bad day. You're about to have a worse day. This is you on camera talking about giving information to people, taking out the word race. You remember this?
Like yesterday, I was approving a protocol to figure out what to suggest that she use. I had suggested like ethnicity or ancestry instead of race.
Isn't that deceitful?
You just gonna get out of my way?
Yeah, I'm out of your way. Isn't that deceitful what you did, sir? To lie?
I don't know what I didn't lie.
You're on video. Changing the words? But you did lie.
I absolutely.
You said changing the words from race to ancestry. Why would you change the words? Why would you? But you would change the words. Isn't that deceitful, sir?
Absolutely not.
It's not a matter of scientific accuracy, though.
Absolutely it was.
How so?
It was. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, you do. You're on video. You do know what I'm talking about. We're here with the guy inside the NIH who's driving away in his Tesla. Listen, you work for the government. Sir, you're avoiding accountability by changing the words from race to ancestry. Isn't it true that ancestry isn't the same thing as race for medical clinical trials, sir?
You don't care about people or their health or their...
I'm a journalist. I care very much about people. You said I don't care about health. You're the one changing the words in the clinical trials, sir.
I believe in good science. I believe in protecting the people.
Then why did you say it's ancestry instead of race?
For accuracy, scientific accuracy.
That doesn't sound accurate, though.
I'm an expert, you're not.
I'm an expert, you're not. Are you kidding me? I'm an expert, you're not. The deceit of these people, the conceit of these people. So the NIH official staggering towards his white Tesla, backing up, saying I'm in his way. I'm not in his way. He could clearly walk from where he was into his vehicle, claiming I'm disrupting him. Then we conduct the interview. He rolls his window down and proceeds to talk to me. He says that I don't care about people, that he cares about people, and he is not being deceitful, even though in the video he clearly changes the words from race to ancestry to circumvent Doge. Clearly pissed off. He's had a bad day. He even told our undercover journalist via text message, it's a bloodbath at work, people losing their jobs. So I didn't want to make his day worse, but I was kind of surprised he didn't just drive away. He kept talking to me. I think he was in a state of shock. He rolled the window down. He said as he was driving away, he said that he cares about people, I don't. He says to me as he's driving away in his Tesla, which that's ironic, by the way. He said that I don't care about people. He cares about people. Of course, we care deeply about people. We want people to know what's going on in their government. And anybody who's against the mission of people knowing what's going on doesn't seem to care about people. They always either run away, assault me, call the police, or say nothing. That was like everything but calling the police right there and assaulting. Very interesting. Here in Bethesda, Maryland. Stay tuned. It's always an adventure with OMG. So I'm literally running after this guy wearing boat shoes. I don't know why. Whenever I'm like actually needing to wear athletic clothing, I'm not. I'm in like a suit. I'm wearing the like least comfortable shoes to run in ever. And we're on a full-on sprint asking him about ancestry in the boat shoes and the laptop. Don't try this at home, okay?
And so we have this deficit, and the way we're going to have to deal with that is to get more growth in the economy, generate more revenue, because when the economy is growing and expanding, it's creating jobs, people are working, they're taking realizations, and they're paying more taxes. And that's what happens when you reduce taxes. And that's why it's so important that we extend and make permanent the 2017 tax law. This is what we're talking about here today. This is what this conversation, frankly, is all about. Now, Mr. President, one of the things that has been interesting in this debate, because I heard lots of conversation from my colleagues on the other side about massive new tax cuts for billionaires. But let me tell you what, if you vote against this budget resolution, you will be voting for. You will be voting for a $4 trillion tax increase on our economy and on the American people. Of that $4 trillion tax increase, $2.6 trillion will fall on people who make less than $400,000 a year. Something that Joe Biden and I think pretty much every Senate Democrat pledged not to do. Well, how does that happen, you ask? Well, here's what happens. In 2017, when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, one of the features of that bill was a doubling of the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000. It also had a near doubling of the standard deduction, and it had a lowering of rates. It had multiple ways in which working families in this country would benefit. If we don't extend the tax relief before the end of the year, $2.6 trillion of that tax increase falls on people making less than $400,000 a year. Now, I've heard the Democrats' own presidential candidate said last year, and I quote, "We cannot, and I will not, raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. That was Vice President Harris, who was running for president. President Biden made the same promise, as did the current Democrat leader. And when the Democrats were considering their so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which perhaps more aptly could have been titled Do Nothing About Inflation Act, the Democrat leader repeatedly emphasized the Democrats would not be raising taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. Well, that's it. That's what you're doing. Because this tax increase is going to hit American families. $2.6 trillion of it is going to hit families making less than $400,000 a year. So you cut the child tax credit. Let's say you have 4 kids in this country. Now, the tax credit, child tax credit, is a direct credit against tax liability, meaning it's a dollar-for-dollar reduction in tax liability if you have a tax liability that exceeds the amount of the credit. So let's say you have 4 kids. Today it's $2,000. Well, if we don't move to extend this tax relief by the end of the year, that $1,000 is going to be from $8,000 down to $4,000, $2,000 per child down to $1,000 per child, and that family's taxes are going to go up by about $4,000. Now, if they don't have that big of a tax liability, there's a refundability component, and we can have a conversation about the merits of that, but that means they're going to be getting a payment or not, and probably not.
This reminds me of a comment that I read. I wasn't able to find it, but it was something to the effect of, if you're single and you're low income and you don't have any children, then you get taxed the most. I think that's what it was. And there's some truth there. However, get married, find yourself a dependent, earn more money.
Because cutting that child tax credit back to $1,000 is going to fall largely on people who have families in this country. Same thing with the standard deduction. It will be cut nearly in half. And the interesting thing about that, Mr. President, is when we made that change back in 2017, fewer people started itemizing, more people started taking the standard deduction because the standard deduction was about $30,000 a year. Well, what happens if we don't extend this tax relief, that $30,000 goes back down to about $15,000 a year. Again, hitting working families. Coupled again with what I said is higher rates. The rates will go back up. So forget about the idea that you're not going to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year, because you clearly are. That's just a fact. It's just simply a fact. So what about small businesses? Well, small businesses would pay, if we don't extend the current tax policy, $600 billion more if these tax cuts expire. Because pass-through businesses, and that's your LLCs, your subchapter S corporations, your sole proprietorships, pay at the individual rate. The rates would go back up, and we put a feature in that bill called 199A. It was a 20% deduction for pass-through businesses. That also goes away. So small businesses are going to pay $600,000 more per year, or I should say, or $600 billion more throughout the course of this tax policy if we don't do something to extend it.
Now, mind you, these are the same Trump tax policies that are set to expire.
Tariffs on all imports that he has described would be a 20% sales tax, in essence, on basic necessities for the average American worker, average American family, totaling almost $4,000 a year. That is no small matter. Here in Pittsburgh,
he wants to impose what is, in effect, a national sales tax on everyday products and basic necessities that we import from other countries. That will devastate Americans. It will mean higher prices on just about every one of your daily needs.
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars.
You want to talk about? He's not. He refused to come. But understand that part of his plan
is to put in place a national sales tax of at least 20% on everyday goods and necessities. And that, by economist estimates, independent economists, would cost you as the American consumer and taxpayer an additional $4,000 a year.
I want you to meet.
Dude wants to talk about his plans, which really are about cutting taxes for the richest people. Please do check out the Wall Street Journal or Goldman Sachs or the 16 Nobel laureates or Moody's, who have all analyzed the plans and said mine will strengthen the economy, his will make it weaker.
We're saying people stay quiet. We are seeing organizations stay quiet. We are seeing those who are capitulating to clearly unconstitutional threats. And these are the things that we are witnessing each day in these last few months in our country. And it understandably creates a great sense of fear. Because, there were many things that we knew would happen. Many things. I'm not here, so I told you so. I swore I wasn't going to say that. But I'll say this, fear has a way of being contagious. Okay? When one person has fear, it has a way of spreading to those around them and spreading. And we are witnessing that, no doubt. But I say this also, my dear friends, courage is also contagious. Courage is also contagious.
So you lose 199A, you lose the lower rates that come with it if you're a small business, and you'll see a lot less investment in our economy. Now, as I mentioned in 2017, two of the objectives in that, particularly on the business side, were to lower rates and to allow for faster cost recovery, and to grow the economy. And it did. It worked. The economy over the past 7 years grew, if you can believe this, 5.4% more than what CBO had projected in 2017 prior to the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, what did that mean? It meant a 50-year low for unemployment, record low poverty, high median household income, a narrowing of the income disparity gap in this country. So, Mr. President, what about deficits? As I said before, by any objective metric, revenues dramatically exceeded what was predicted in 2017 about what the effect of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would be. Now, revenues, as I mentioned, you look at this chart again, on average about 17% as a percentage of our economy. Unfortunately, spending as a percentage of our economy, which as recently as a decade ago was about 20%, is now over 23%, and growing to 24 to 25%. And part of that is all the new spending that was associated with things like, for example, the IRA. So the inflation, so-called Inflation Reduction Act, there were some provisions in there, some energy provisions, for example, that at the time were scored to cost about a little over $200 billion. Today, they're actually over $1 trillion, so CBO missed that one by about 400%. And as I said earlier, the Council of Economic Advisors projects a $4.1 trillion increase in revenue from extending the 2017 law. So could it be that the run-up in deficits happened because of the last two Democrat reconciliation bills? Or perhaps some other things that they have done along the way, like the $250 billion in SNAP increase, almost, as I said, without any approval from Congress, something that my colleagues on the other side have talked about, how this executive branch has, ignored the will of Congress. Well, that was a $250 billion increase without approval from Congress. Then you had the student loan forgiveness program. And as you recall, student loans, that program was used as a pay-for back in a reconciliation bill the Democrats did back in 2010. And when they did that, many of us predicted that they would go ahead and use it to forgive student loans. So student loan now forgiveness, which is subject to court action, resulted in several $100 billion of additional spending not approved by the Congress, but that particular move got no pushback from anybody on this side of the aisle, not a peep. Hundreds of billions of dollars of spending by use of executive power. And what I concluded from all this is that my colleagues on the other side talk a lot about misuse or abuse, if you will, of executive power, but that's not the issue.
Imagine if I had done any of this. Let me I just want to be clear about this. Imagine that and I say this not on a partisan basis. This has to do with something more precious, which is, who are we as a country and what values do we stand for?
It's how the executive power is used. And if it's used in a way that you agree with, which it was in both of those examples I just mentioned, then you're fine with use of executive power. Like I said, didn't hear a peep from people over here when that was done. Now, my colleagues, both Senator Graham and Senator Crapo, talked about the use of a current policy baseline. So in 2012, the Obama White House came up with something called the alternative fiscal scenario when it came time to extend the Bush tax cuts. And that was about a $4 trillion use of the alternative fiscal scenario. Translation, current policy baseline. There are 18 Democrats still here in the Senate today who voted for that, for use of that baseline. And Mr. President, I would simply say that when it comes to extending tax relief, there's always a reluctance by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. When it comes to new spending, they embrace that idea. We have a different view. We have different views of government. And the use of reconciliation, which is what this is about, the budget resolution opens the door to reconciliation, is in many respects a great example of the contrast in how we view this. The Democrats view reconciliation as a way to grow government. Increased spending, new programs. The ARPA bill was about $2 trillion in spending. The IRA was about $1 trillion in spending. Both were used by the Democrats through a budget resolution and reconciliation to increase spending. Republicans, a lot of times, and we did in 2017, used it to reduce taxes and to reform the tax code, which was desperately needed. But as a consequence of that, as I said, we got not less revenue but more, $1.5 trillion more than was predicted at the time. And on the other side of the equation, when it comes to spending, the estimators, the so-called referees, tend to underestimate how much things are going to cost. Example, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. But the bottom line in all this, Madam President, is that we need to address a lot of concerns in this country, many of which are dealt with in this budget resolution and ultimately the budget reconciliation bill. But one of the most important ones is this number right here. The deficits that continue to grow over time as a result not of too little revenue, which continues to increase over time, but of dramatically increased spending. That's the issue. And my colleagues here on this side of the aisle believe that you get at that by bending the curve down on the spending side, and on the tax, regulatory, energy side, pro-growth policies, particularly making permanent the tax policy that was passed in 2017, that will unleash investment in America and which will lead ultimately not only to better paying jobs, lower unemployment, hopefully a narrowing of the income disparity that we have in this country, but also, interestingly enough, higher government revenues. That's what this is all about, whether you want to vote for extending the tax policy and avoiding a $4 trillion tax increase, or whether you want to vote in favor of this resolution and make sure that the 2017 tax policy that was passed is extended permanently and that it unleashes the American economy in a way that will continue not only to create those better paying jobs, but also make this deficit picture look a lot smaller by comparison, coupled with significant reductions in spending. That's what we got to do. That's what this is about. And I hope that our colleagues, all of our colleagues on this side of the aisle, will vote yes tonight. We're going to have a number of amendment votes, which always happens during a budget resolution, vote-a-rama, and we look forward to getting that process underway. So let's let the voting begin.
If peace is real, we will know soon enough. If they're not interested in peace, we will know soon enough. And we'll make decisions on the basis. I hope they are real. There are some promising signs, there are some troubling signs. It's not going to be easy. No one ever said this would be easy. But we're going to find out sooner rather than later. And let's just say I'm hopeful. I remain hopeful. I need to be hopeful that peace is possible and that the Russians are serious about peace. We want them to be serious about peace. And hopefully they are, but we'll know sooner rather than later.
Daphne Reuters.
Hi, sorry, I'm back here.
Your last name's Reuters? Oh, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Go ahead.
On the 5% defense spending target, have you received pushback to this idea while you've been here this week? And you mentioned yesterday up to 5% was your language. What do you mean by up to 5%?
Well, I said up to a path up, getting up to 5% at some point. I'm not saying overnight, but to get to that point. We think that's what NATO allies need to be spending for NATO to face the threats that it itself has identified and articulated. Here's the good news. The good news is everyone generally, with a couple exceptions, are spending more on defense today than they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. That's positive. That trend needs to continue. So the trend lines are good, but they need to continue. But this is not about spending. Okay, this is not about money necessarily. This is about capability. In order for NATO to be stronger, it needs partners that are stronger. Okay, the United States commits a lot to NATO and continues to. We are as involved in NATO today as we have ever been. And we intend to continue to be. But it has to be a real alliance. And that means that our alliance partners have to increase their own capabilities. So hopefully two things have led to that. The first is the war in Ukraine, I think, has woken up a lot of people on the continent about real threats and real war. And the other is, I think, the pressure and the statements of President Trump that have been pretty consistent about increasing their spending. So this whole trajectory of more defense spending began, I believe, back in 2017, 2018, under President Trump's first term. We want that trend to continue. And we're hoping when the leaders meet in The Hague that there'll be further and firmer commitments in that direction. I think it's beneficial to the alliance. The stronger our partners in NATO are, the more capable our partners in NATO are, the stronger NATO is. And everybody should be in favor of that.
And sorry, just to follow up, so will you try and get the official target as 5% rather than 2%, and will the U.S. commit to 5%?
Sure, we're heading there now. We're going to have to spend more on national security because we have a global footprint. And that's the point that I think has been made and missed in a lot of places. Okay, the United States has Indo-Pacific alliance obligations as well that we've made. We are currently involved in opening up the Red Sea so that global shipping for everyone, including our European partners, can become possible again. We're engaged in counter-drug and counter-gang interdictions in the Western Hemisphere. There's obviously all sorts of issues going on in different parts of the world, including we're concerned about a resurgence of terrorist cells, whether it's in Africa or in the Middle East. So the U.S. has these global obligations, and we have China that's undergoing the largest, most expansive peacetime military expansion in history. So we need to confront all of these things, and we're engaged in all of those things. So we're going to have to increase defense spending in our country. I think our commitment to NATO isn't just 3% spending of GDP. It's sustained over an extraordinary period of time, and that continues. So, look, I think our partners know they need to do more. They've all indicated they want to do more. They've begun to do more, and that trend needs to continue.
I'm the average American right here at this table.
And this is where it all began. So we're going to run through this. This will be wrapping this up. And we're going to talk about whatever this Van Lathan has to say about what he just doesn't understand, or better yet, maybe he just refuses to accept the truth.
Because you guys are talking and I don't really understand what it is that you guys are saying. Like, seriously, I don't get it. The only thing that a lot of people who have families, who carpool, who go to and from the work, who live in the suburbs, who live in the cities, they're just wondering, when things are going to get bad. That's what they're wondering. And all of the macroeconomic talk is going over their head. And honestly, I feel for them. I feel for them because it doesn't seem like anyone is talking directly to them. They're talking to the markets, they're talking to each other, they're talking to the financial system, but no one's telling somebody, hey, at the end of this summer, when you need to buy school supplies for your kids to go back to school when it's backpack time, like that money will be there and those prices will be stable. No one is talking to them. And I think that's the biggest tragedy in all of this.
The truth to be told to them, most people don't want to say. Because we had it today from Jerome Powell, chair of the Fed. He said there will be higher inflation, there will be slower growth. So the real sadness tonight is the people at home who are looking to retire.
Absolutely.
In the next year or two, and have suddenly seen their retirement funds go down by 20, 30, 40%. Because they wanted to take advantage of the Magnificent Seven and all of those sort of things. Tonight they're wondering, how the heck do I actually do it?
And so I've got a question for you. And if you find yourself in this category or know anybody, share this video. But hear me out here. If you were looking to retire and you just saw recently a drop in your portfolio, 20, 30, 40%, whatever it may be, what are you going to do? Flip side, if you were looking to retire and you saw an increase in your portfolio by 20, 30, 40%, would you have just said, fuck it, I'm going to retire now? Asking for a friend.
This is real life economics, to your point. You're right. The sort of nonsense that we can all go on about.
Oh, it's not nonsense.
Well,
I'm just saying.
But it's totally true because you're making a really important point. There is not some kind of 360 plan that has been articulated to America here. You know, Trump said, well, we're going to have to take a little pain. What does that mean? Who's taking the pain? The average working person will be taking the pain because when inflation hits, those are the people that spend 60% of their take home in energy and food, fueling their cars. I mean, we're going to be in a very, very difficult situation.
I find it insane that we're all finally concerned about inflation. That was a word that really didn't exist for many years while Joe Biden was president. But I want to point out something. Last night, Richard, you took off your shoe. You said it's made in Vietnam. It's going to be 34% more expensive next year. Today, the Secretary General of Vietnam reached out to President Trump and said, we want to have zero tariffs for both countries, proving to some degree that this is a leverage play.
What does that prove, Joe?
It proves.
What does that prove? Because at the end of the conversation, the president said, nice talking to you. And nothing about, we're going to have a deal, lower our tariffs.
I'm going to tell you what it proves.
He said, great conversation.
Let's look historically. 1996, there was a member of Congress who stood on the floor looking at 2% tariffs we had on China, 35% tariffs they had on us.
And calm down, Abby. Jesus, Lord. Has no one ever taught you never accept the first offer?
This woman demanded that we had reciprocal tariffs. You know who that was? Nancy Pelosi. 2008, same thing. A guy stood on the Senate floor lamenting.
Reciprocal tariffs.
I'm just saying, they lamented the loss of America's workers.
Lowered its tariff barrier to 0. You know what we did? We raised our tariff barrier to 17%.
Again, just going back. Democrats have repeatedly said, I have a list of quotes here, repeatedly said we should have reciprocal tariffs on different countries and did nothing. They're a party of Cory Bookers. Let's just talk, not do anything.
Hey, Grok, let me ask you a question. Abby Phillip said on CNN in an argument against President Trump's tariffs and how Israel lowered their tariff barrier to 0%. And in response, Donald Trump raised the U.S.'s to 17%. Is this true? I feel like there's missing context that would be extremely important here in explaining the full story. Not to mention, I would be willing to bet this has something to do with the debt owed to the U.S. by Israel for the countless weapons provided to their military. And Grok says yes. Abby Phillip's statement on CNN, as you described it, aligns with the factual timeline of events based on available information as of April 5th, 2025 today. And Israel did lower its tariffs on U.S. imports to 0% in an attempt to avoid being hit by President Trump's new tariff policy. And despite this, the U.S. imposed a 17% tariff on Israeli goods. However, You're right to suspect there's missing context. There's more to the story that complicates the narrative, and while the U.S. debt and military aid to Israel could be tangentially related, they don't appear to be the direct driver of this specific tariff decision. But here's the fuller picture. So earlier, just a few days ago, President Trump announced a sweeping tariff policy aimed at reducing U.S. trade deficits and boosting domestic manufacturing. This included a baseline 10% tariff on nearly all imports and higher reciprocal tariffs on countries with significant trade surpluses with the U.S. Israel, which had a trade surplus of about $8 billion with the U.S. in 2024, with exports to the U.S. around $17 billion, was slapped with a 17% tariff. This was part of a formula where the U.S. calculated tariffs based on trade imbalances, not just mirroring the other countries' tariff rates. Israel's tariff on U.S. goods had already been minimal. 99% of U.S. imports were tariff-free since a 1985 free trade agreement. And on April 1, 2025, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich eliminated the remaining 1%, mostly on agricultural goods, in a last-ditch effort to appease Trump and secure an exemption. Despite this, the U.S. imposed a 17% duty on Israeli exports, effective April 9, 2025, catching Israeli officials off guard. The missing context here is Trump's stated rationale and the broader policy framework. He framed the tariffs as a tool for economic independence, arguing they would generate revenue estimated at $600 billion annually to cut taxes, reduce the national debt, and bring manufacturing back to the U.S. The 17% tariff on Israel wasn't a direct response to Israel's tariff rates, but rather a reflection of the trade surplus Israel enjoys with the U.S. Trump's administration claimed this was reciprocal in a broader sense, targeting countries that export more to the U.S. than they import, but critics, including some on X, pointed out this isn't true reciprocity since Israel had already opened its market fully to U.S. goods. Economists in Israel and Israeli officials argued it punishes countries for successfully selling products Americans want, like medical equipment, machinery, and diamonds, which make up a chunk of Israel's exports. As for your hunch about U.S. debt and military aid, it's a plausible angle, but there's no direct evidence tying the tariff to Israel's military support. The U.S. has provided Israel with significant aid, $3.8 billion annually in recent years, plus emergency arms sales like the $3 billion bomb package approved in February of this year. Israel doesn't owe the U.S. a traditional debt for this, as it's mostly grants, not loans. However, the U.S. could theoretically use economic leverage like tariffs to offset the cost of that aid or push geopolitical goals. Some speculate Trump's move might signal frustration with Israel's trade practices, for example, claims of intellectual property issues in pharmaceuticals or a broader shift in U.S.-Israel economic relations. Yet, the tariff announcement focused on trade deficits, not military aid repayment, and administration officials haven't publicly linked the two. The fuller story suggests a disconnect between Trump's stated goals and the policy's impact. Israel's Manufacturers Association warned of job losses and reduced competitiveness, while economists like Citi's Michael Ness estimates a $3 billion hit to Israel's economy, or 0.6% of GDP. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers might face higher prices for Israeli goods, and critics argue the tariffs could spark a global trade war, contradicting the Make America Wealthy Again promise. So, while Abby Phillips' point is technically accurate, it oversimplifies a complex policy driven by trade imbalances, not just a tit-for-tat tariff spat, and the military aid angle remains speculative without more concrete ties. However, I will create even more speculation here in regard to what is being done and why these things are happening. And no matter what candidate was running for president you would have voted for or stood behind, a proposal of cutting taxes, a proposal of reducing the national debt, and a proposal of bringing manufacturing to the U.S., I think would have received a unanimous yes, yes, and yes, please. Give me more. But it's funny how when it actually starts to happen, people get all bent out of shape about what it takes to make that happen.
You talk about the Vietnam. I'm so glad you brought up Vietnam.
Oh,
And
no.
I'll
I
also,
tipped you off.
And I'll also bring up Cambodia. The problem with going to zero tariffs with Vietnam and Cambodia, great. First of all, the US exports almost next to nothing to those countries. It's negligible. It's less than 500 million. But let's assume you go to zero. The problem with both of those countries is not the nominal tariff rate of 30%, 15%. It's the non-tariff barriers, the government procurement rules, the ownership rules, everything else that Donald Trump quite rightly said on Wednesday, quite rightly
You
said.
took your shoe off. You said it's going to be 34% more expensive because of the tariff. Today, the Secretary General, forgive me, I forget the party name, the president's called Donald Trump and said, we want to actually negotiate
But that's not going to help.
That would be favorable. That would be favorable. The problem is Democrats have been promising this. Bernie Sanders used to call free trade a right-wing conspiracy or something like that. Never did anything about it. Never did anything about it.
Oh,
right?
I'm sorry.
And now,
I got to beg to differ
Please.
because here's the history. And I'm going to give both sides some credit. Trump won. Bob Lighthizer, the USTR, comes in and says, you know what? We got to rejigger the global trading system. It was a good thing to say. Tariffs on China, fine. Biden keeps those. Then he actually articulates a real industrial policy. He says, what do we need most of all in this country? Chips. We brought back the semiconductor industry in 18 months. That's how you do this. Trump now comes in, and he had, let me finish, he had an opportunity here, actually, given the strength of the U.S. economy at this moment, to really work with allies and say, this is the time, Europe, Canada, Mexico, we're going to go to China and say, here's the new game, and here's how it's going to be played. He didn't do that. He is squandering our
Did I not see Taiwan?
I have to disagree with that slightly because that's not giving President Trump any credit for the amount of foreign investment that has been pledged in this very brief time of this administration. It's most estimates between $2 to $3 trillion commitments from SoftBank, from Taiwan Semi, to bring back. Well, Richard, you scoff. Why do you scoff?
I do, because
Please.
I take
issue with the scoff, sir.
I do. No, you can take as much issue as you like. But these are, of course, valid. If it happens,
They are. It's no less valid than the
Wisconsin,
CHIPS Act.
Wisconsin, and the factory that was supposed to be built by I can't remember the company in 2018 never happened. These are promises being made to appease a president to get him off your back. Let's see how much of that $2 trillion.
Including some promises
I think they'll
that
be
were,
breaking ground
including
Savannah
some
next week with,
promises
Hyundai Motors
of some
on the new $8
plans
billion
that were
plant.
already in the works.
Stellantis is opening
Joe,
a plant
just a
for
second.
BMW. Sorry.
Just a
So
second.
is the guy from Staten
Including
Island.
some promises that were made, that were planned when Joe Biden was president and held off to announce after they waited to see who won the election. Businesses are not stupid. They do what they need to do to get in the good graces of Donald Trump. It's not rocket science. One last note. They were supposed to have a deal with China on TikTok, supposed to be announced this weekend. That is on hold now. And
Why do you think that is, though, Abby?
Well, because China says, we want you to bring down your tariffs, and we're going to hold TikTok hostage until you do. And they're getting their way.
But that's to your initial point. It's part of the negotiation.
I don't think we're on the winning side of that negotiation.
But that remains to be seen.
We're not on the winning side of that negotiation. China has all the power.
If chaos is the only thing that you can count on, people will bet on chaos. And when you're betting on chaos, that keeps you tense. It keeps you tight. You don't move in good faith. You think, hey, this guy changes his mind every single minute, every single hour, and you start to kind of hold on to it. Right.
Correct.
So I think what is clear here is that if you're of the woke mind and infected, and you claim you don't understand what people are talking about, maybe it's because you just don't want to hear what they're talking about. Maybe you fall into that category of you just don't like being told the truth. You prefer to be lied to. Yeah. Abby, businesses are not stupid. That's a broad monolith, blanket statement and stereotype. And I'd have to just ask you a question. Have you seen the new Jaguar? Anyway. Thank you guys for spending this time with me, and I'm no longer going to subject you to the arguments, or better yet, more so the history lesson, stroll down memory lane that got us here. And here, in fact, is a good place, a great place. And I'll let Caroline Levitt take us out.
Hey guys, it's a beautiful day here at the White House, and it's been another great week. Let's go through all of the historic actions that President Trump took this week to help you, the American people. Companies like Hyundai, Rolls-Royce, and Schneider Electric announced billions of dollars in new investments into the United States to create jobs for hardworking Americans. The president signed a proclamation levying 25% tariffs on foreign automobile imports, encouraging companies to build vehicles right here in the United States of America. The White House recognized the bravery and service of Medal of Honor recipients in the White House on Medal of Honor Day. The president welcomed some of the country's strongest and most intelligent women to the White House to celebrate Women's History Month. And the president signed an executive order to make D.C. safe and beautiful once again. And the Trump administration executed a very successful operation to apprehend a top MS-13 ringleader just 30 minutes outside of our nation's capital. Every day, because of this president, America is safer. We'll see you for next week's MAGA Minute.